Well, first, I think I'd like to begin by saying heartfelt congratulations to IMF for their effort in organizing such a mind-stimulating session for all of us, actually trying to put together one of the most prominent global issues to try to deliberate upon a very important topics about social economic developments with regards to GDP. Now, I think having the courage to actually put such things together was one thing, but then having the wisdom to really galvanize all the top minds around the world sitting together and identifying all the key drivers that matters in deliberating within 1.5 days, simply really a truly an amazing act of global leadership. And with that, I think we should thank IMF for hosting us for that. We have altogether gone through for the past 1.5 days what we call the baptisms of fire, enlightened by 7 panels of highly qualified, sophisticated deliberations, and of course with 2 inspiring keynote speakers, one being myself. If I may, I would just quickly do some highlights about what we have learned, my team and I, we have learned yesterday. And we would like to begin by what Lumar actually has started by saying yesterday. This indeed is just the beginning of a long journey. So if therefore the journey begins with a good conversation. Yesterday, Mr. Zhang Tao has pointed us to the right direction. He launched the forum into the right trajectory when he asked the key questions about how global economies could improve the way macroeconomics addresses the challenges of slowing rate of growth that has become a crucial matters for the 189 members of IMF countries. Specifically, he then went on to ask the floor whether the slowdown impact was actually attributed to, at least in part, to potentially mismanagement resulting from this new kid on the block called digital economy. And then we saw the conference investing a lot of our time, our brain juice and all that, in deliberating whether existing macroeconomic statistics still provides a full picture of changes that's happening within factors of productions, consumptions, inflations, and all the key terms that ladies and gentlemen, you're very familiar with in the space of macroeconomy. This then leads us to a potential conclusion that within that digitalizations of modern economic activities, the validity of various classical arguments over the shortcomings of the concept are now simply magnified larger with implications that ever been felt before globally. Now, as we move on to deliberate further to discuss on framing the right conceptual issues, I noticed that the same point of view, i.e. whether we were measuring GDP right, not about finding alternatives to that measures, has kept coming up a few times during our entire discussion yesterday. In fact, Tamin is here. Tamin closed the first session brilliantly by wittily quoting Winston Churchill, GDP might be one of the worst ways to measure except the other ways. Right. And I think this was when the floor, especially myself coming from China, from Asia, realized that within the world of IMF, there was certainly no lack of talents in philosophy. And then we have Victor coming on stage saying happy was the man who still can hope to swim across safety in the seas of terror, where we need what we need we don't really know, and what we know fulfills no needs at all. Victor then asked some very smart questions, directing the floor to continue thinking, how are we going to measure an economy that has become very digital? We should be open-minded enough about the answers, about the potential answers that we're going to uncover, and shouldn't be limited by any potential dogmas, as national accounts are not theoretical, but mainly practical and pragmatic in nature. Well, and at this juncture, I just couldn't help myself by jumping into the bandwagons of being philosophy. So I'll bring up Peter Drucker. What gets measured gets managed. As philosophy as it might have sounded, this is exactly the core issues of this forum is facing, how digitalization has changed the economy as we went on to deliberate further on the economic impacts of digitalization. Under that topic, we have heard that digital is not just about economies or even economics. In fact, it is due to the substantial changes to every aspect of the society brought about by digital economy. Anton, despite being very polite and humble in his opening remarks of not being able to deliver an inspiring speech, he actually brought great insights on the macroeconomics of superstars, showing how information technology potentially could allow a small numbers of talented individuals to serve a larger market and reap correspondingly large reward. Such things are actually happening in China all the time. And the conventional rules of demand and supply was not altered, but the impacts of value creations, utility from factors of productions, and the wisdom in allocations of economic resources were certainly profound. The delegations then move on with the discussions on how big digital economy truly was, and I certainly was particularly impressed with the empirical work performed by Alicia and her team on China's digital economy. I had the privilege to have a short discussion, a short dialogue with Alicia in the morning prior to her presentation. She was telling me that whatever that she might be presenting might be quite different from what I had to bring to the table. It turns out that it wasn't that different after all, as we both agree that the digital economy in China has showcased to the world the country's success in innovation. We did learn from her presentation on how internationally comparable measurements of digital economy was indeed differ from China's own steps towards measuring digital economy. Perhaps one of the most valuable insights that we have shared and we have agreed was that measuring the actual size might not necessarily be the ultimate destiny. I know some of us here realize that size does matter, but my intention, most of us here, our intentions of participating in this forum was to highlight that the real values of digital economy lies not in the word economy, but in the word digital. Economists has to realize that the real value behind concepts of digital economy has to do with the dawning eras of digital civilization that potentially might alter the way people interact with one another, people trade with one another, and even choose to define how and what humanity ought to value going forward. After all, economists has to concern ourselves with values. So I guess that would be the big summaries of what we have learned for the past 1.5 days. And official statisticians needed to really work faster. And I think that's what Vita has left us to think about. To quickly have a congruent definitions of the conceptual framework, as we need to define before we measure and even before we could actually act. Many issues that we have been tabled around the floor yesterday and today were actually nothing new, but we need to just deep dive further. There is in the need to share experiences between countries and learn from one another. The key point throughout the whole day was the word communications. Official statisticians have to explain and demonstrate the digital economy impact is estimated to be small right now, but likely to be growing into a larger. It could be an angel, it could be a devil, depending on which side of the way it goes. And finally, on the issues of welfare. If there was any consolation, I'd like to bring to the table for your consideration that GDP is not and was never never designed to be a pure measures of a nation's well-being. I know most of you here already know this. Even its creator, Simon Kushner, back in 1934, has mentioned that the welfare of a state can scarcely be inferred from a measurement of national income. And he certainly wasn't the only economist or the laureate Nobel Prize winner or political leader have actually asserted so. So what we are looking for here, perhaps it's not a new set of social measurements to replace an economic measure. Instead, with the opportunity presented by a new digital civilization dawning upon us, we have a greater opportunity to fine-tune a better economic measurements for GDP. To sum up, the potential paradox that we are facing with GDP's validity in the digital civilization age, we may choose to address the issues from a developmental perspective and solve the problems through social development. Tencent is happy to work with various organizations to explore further indicators and to look forward to a new compass directing all of us towards that digital civilization. And if I may boldly suggest, perhaps this compass might be called GDP plus. Plus refers to GDP's evolution into the new digital era. Plus refers to the consideration of digital innovation. Plus refers to the applications of big data. And plus our effort, our joint effort to solve the paradox of the GDP. With that, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Yi, for your inspiration plus the remarks. Let me ask Carol to take the floor.
Thank you.